Roastar Coffee Packaging, found online at roastar.com, prints great-looking bags for a host of your favorite coffee companies of all sizes, who trust Roastar to produce packages worthy of their specialty coffee beans. It's Roastar's mission, their ethos, to help their customers tell their stories, big or small. That includes those of you roasting coffee at home. If you're a small home roaster wanting to share your coffee with friends, family, and your coffee community, Roastar will support you too. Head to roastar.com to learn more about their quick turnaround times, digital printing, and small print runs, or use their design lab to create an entirely new package in the blink of an eye. In short, Roastar can help you, and on roastar.com, you can start with a quote and end with the perfect coffee bag to share your story. Yeah, okay. I'm going to have to delete the first 8 minutes of this show, and
Sure.
we should really get into you, if that's all right.
Yeah, absolutely.
If you wouldn't mind, let everyone know who you are and what your company is and where you're located.
Yeah, absolutely. Just to be clear, so should I, are we officially starting, or is there an introduction that you want to record as well, or just jump right
This
in?
is good. We'll jump right in. I'm going to
All
leave
right,
that in too.
I like it.
Hey, good morning, everyone. Welcome to Season 11, Episode 10 of the Coffee People Podcast, which is part of the Roast West Coast Coffee Network and presented by Roastar Coffee Packaging. I'm Ryan Woldt, and this is the show where we meet and chat with coffee people from all corners of this expansive industry. It's our last show of the season, and I wrote this down, but holy moly, it all goes so fast. Sometimes it takes an ending to remind me to really take this all in. I'm grateful for all of you that listen, and I'm especially grateful for all of our guests who spend an hour sharing their stories, their motivations, their failures, their successes, basically sharing this core key component of their life with us. It's a great gift to be able to tell those stories, or at least provide the platform for someone else to tell them. Today's guest is Sahand Dilmaghani. He's the CEO and founder of Terra Kaffe. And we took a few tangents. We spent a lot of time chatting about leadership and motivation. And frankly, it got my brain spinning in a good way. Terra Kaffe produces a super automatic bean-to-cup espresso machine with the capability to produce your morning coffee in pretty much whatever format you'd like. Espresso, sure, but also drip coffee, cappuccino, even iced drinks. It grinds and brews and froths and even knows when to run its own deep clean cycle. And it was inspired by Sahand's own trips through the retail aisle looking for a machine to put on his countertop. While you're listening to the podcast today, be sure to check out terrakaffe.com. Cafe is spelled Kaffe. You'll find the links in this podcast show notes wherever you're listening, or in our newsletter, found at coffeepeoplepodcast.com. Real quick, some logistics before we get started. Thank you to everyone who has subscribed to the paid newsletter, offering a monthly level of support, or click through the links in the show notes to buy us a cup of coffee. We operate on an NPR radio-like model, where we combine revenue from supporters like you with our monthly sponsors to keep the lights on and keep telling these stories of coffee people. So thank you for your support and the coffees. I'm drinking coffee right now. It's the Who's a Good Pup blend of 50% Colombia and 50% Honduras from our friends at Cozy Canine Coffee. I brewed it up in a French press this morning because I don't have a Terra Kaffe TK2. Not yet anyways. If you do, select your favorite coffee beverage and select brew. You're going to want it when you settle in to listen to another episode of the Coffee People Podcast. This one, the very last of Season 11. Featuring Sahand Dilmaghani, the CEO and founder of Terra Kaffe. Here we go.
Well, yeah, happy to share a little bit about myself, a little bit about my background. My name's Sahand Dilmaghani. I'm born and raised in Virginia. to first generation American household. So both my parents are Iranian, and grew up kind of in that multicultural background, or that backdrop to also being a kid in Virginia. But it was a great upbringing, honestly. I mean, it was a very kind of quintessential American kind of white picket fence without the white picket fence kind of upbringing, nuclear family. But I think that the entire journey of just having, parents that immigrated into the country and then being first generation American, like it definitely shaped me very heavily in terms of just life experiences and expectations. So I stayed in the US when I went to my undergrad, and then hopped around a little bit, lived in China for a little bit, came back to the US. Always kind of had this drive, or just, I don't know, motivation, intrinsic or maybe otherwise, to keep building things. I was that kid who kind of took his lemonade stand a little too seriously. And yeah, I mean, I was always tinkering with things, but I did think what really did help was just an upbringing that cultivated taking it a little further, like a step further, a step further. So like I would want to like play with something, and I would want to think about it and try and, I don't know, put like one foot in front of the other. But I felt like one thing that really helped was, especially my mom really encouraged me to kind of see things through. And so that's what kind of always ended up materializing into any idea I had, just trying to take it as far as possible.
That's really interesting. Being that first generation, do you think you said the word quintessential, which made me think of this. Do you think your upbringing was more quintessential because that was a motivator for your parents to try to give you an American upbringing, stereotypically?
Do I think it was a motivator?
Yeah, I mean, so my neighbors downstairs are actually first generation Iranian immigrants, and they kind of went out of their way to make sure their kids grew up thinking like and acting. This is what an American lifestyle is like. Do you think there was any of that?
I think it was both. I think it was both. I think that there was a motivation for appreciation of what we had. And my parents definitely wanted to make sure that we had a lifestyle that was akin to, an average American kid growing up, making sure that we could also enjoy a lot of those things that, even if they weren't acutely familiar with, knew that was a big part of having like a formative American upbringing, right? And at the same time, they wanted us to make sure that we knew our heritage and our culture. And so we grew up speaking two languages. And then, I mean, as crazy as it is, I would do Farsi school on Saturday, Chinese school on Sunday, and then I'd have Spanish classes Monday to Friday. So I don't know
Oh my goodness.
what you want to do with that. I think we're starting to depart from the quintessence, but yeah.
Yeah, that might be a little bit different. I'm on my second semester of Duolingo Italian, so that's about as far as it goes.
There was a lot of appreciation for it. And it was definitely, I would say, it was a very healthy balance, even, in moments where I would think it was a lot as a kid. I mean, when I reflect on all of it, I appreciate it so much.
Was coffee part of your upbringing at all?
Heavily.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, what's a memory, or how did that come into your life in a way that you look back and go, "Oh yeah, I remember that."
I just knew it was the staple. It was always in our household, both my mom and my dad, every morning without fail. Different approach to coffee, mind you. So that was always very interesting, and I always thought it was really nice. I mean, we had one of these Krups machines from the 1980s. We still have it. So really kind of like a nice little vintage piece now, where you would actually pour in. There was no really real water reservoir. It would just sit atop the portafilter basket. You would fill that up and seal it. I'm pretty sure the warnings were still in German, if I'm not mistaken. I still remember that. We had that. And then my dad always classic full pot of coffee. So, just classic drip, pour over, whatever. But, would always make a full pot. And so that was every morning. But, it's Persian culture also has a heavy tea component to it too. So it was always my joke with like our culture was, it's like hot drinks as a whole are the social nucleus, and I don't make the rules, I just follow them. But it was coffee, tea, and dried fruits. For whatever reason, we decided that's how we're all going to hang out. And so yeah, huge part of our just lifestyle and routine.
And I'm just on my own experience, I would say this incredible seasoned rice with meat and grilled tomatoes is a dish that our neighbors bring us and like leave on our porch all the time. Unbelievable.
It's unreal. My neighbor would come to my house every weekend for barbecue, every single weekend.
Your company, Terra Cafe, now is making these pretty, I'm going to let you describe it, these
Sure.
machines. Could you give us a primer of what Terra Cafe is?
So Terra Cafe at the highest level produces what I would say are the most beautifully designed and technologically advanced automatic espresso machines that brew bean to cup. So no single use plastic or aluminum pods in the system. Bean to cup machines had been around for a while when we got started, but the way I really made the decision to make a leap into this space was when I went actually out looking for a new machine. So I vividly remember shopping around, going to Best Buy, excuse me, Bed Bath at the time, which I guess they're not around anymore, but Williams Sonoma, Sur La Table, all of them, kind of just getting acquainted with that category and having had, a Breville, having had, all sorts of coffee gadgets, most commonly actually either the batch brewer or Turkish coffee at home, was looking for something that would serve the whole family and was easy to use, but didn't have to resort to the pods. And when I was looking at these machines, I was like, why does this look like everything is stuck? And then, it's not even Apple and BlackBerry. It was like Apple and Sega Genesis. And I was just like not understanding it. And at the time, I was working for an automotive company in Germany where I was surrounded by these incredible industrial designers. And I just was surrounded by beautiful products that were of the time. And that was really where I thought, okay, I'm going to dig deeper into this and look into seeing if other people are looking for a more modernized contemporary approach to a category that frankly checks a lot of boxes for what a lot of people need.
You mentioned that you were in Germany in the automotive industry. What were you doing before you decided to set out on this that you think kind of gave you some skill sets to jump into this world?
If it wasn't for that experience, there's no chance I would have been able to make Terra Cafe successful. It was, I always joke, making the leap to move over to Germany. I remember I quit my job in the U.S. on a Friday and I started in Germany on a Monday, and I thought I could pack up an entire apartment over a weekend, which was unwise, to say the least.
Well, to be fair, a New York apartment's not exactly the same size as a lot of other apartments.
Yeah, so effectively packing up a closet. I ended up moving to this company where I was supposed to be doing kind of a mixture of finance and corporate development work, but it wasn't necessarily. It was a 7-person company. If you've ever joined an early stage startup, the reality of it is you wear all the hats, you do all the things. You have to, especially being a good contributor to the team, is you have to be really amenable to just throttling in and out of things where people need help. And I, again, because I speak Mandarin, I got a lot of exposure to what it took to build product. How do you carry something from ideation to mass production? How do you carry something that's not just hardware, but has a lot of software components, firmware components, connectivity? Like, how do you think through all of those things? What is necessary to build net new? What is necessary to utilize, existing components or things that are available off the shelf to really focus on where are you trying to differentiate? What are you trying to offer that's unique? Because you can't really build everything. And I think just going through that journey of scaling that company, I mean, I saw a lot of things done, if I can say, like raw, but it truly is everything, that you need to see firsthand to learn from. So before you make that leap to start your own thing, that was just huge for me. And I think that specifically joining that company, I always joke that it was like the least economically lucrative thing I could have ever done because Berlin salaries are not great, but it was the most professionally and socially rewarding and enriching thing I could have done. I wouldn't be here right now if it wasn't for that experience. No question.
I think that one of the reasons myself and I have two brothers, and we all have tried to do our own companies at various points in our life, or and are right now, It's because we saw our parents do it and we saw how challenging it was. We knew the work we'd have to do and the success or failure rates weren't great, but we knew that it could be done. You didn't mention what your parents did. You experienced it seeing this company kind of going through the process that you would eventually go through and I assume improve on. But was entrepreneurship part of your upbringing?
It was. It was. It's interesting. Both my parents are architects, so
Building things.
exactly, and yeah, imbues you with a sense of design and the importance of the spaces that surround us. Which, again, as a child, I could tell you, like, I had one brother growing up. We both went into fields that could not be further from architecture. But then, weirdly, as we got older, I think we both kind of reconverged for our love of just, I don't know. I think it's the design elements, but it's really, frankly, anything in the creative fields. You start to, come back to that and, just remember your childhood and all the beauty that we were surrounded by. But my mom started her own architecture firm, and I also saw how hard that was. But I mean, she was working for a really good firm for a long time, but always wanted to kind of set off and start up her own agency or architecture studio, and built that up into something that was quite meaningful. But I also saw the entire roller coaster ride along the way, and I it's weird that it didn't scare me off. I
Mm-hmm.
don't actually, and I don't know if you shared this feeling at all from what you saw, but I do feel like it's hard to articulate exactly what it was that you recognize in terms of seeing someone to kind of like, I don't want to say fight the good fight because that feels very reductive, but I certainly feel like there is a lot of beauty in watching somebody trying to really build something of their own, and then also the satisfaction that comes with that. And it's really hard to find that elsewhere. And so I just, as much as I saw the like trials and tribulations, I think just being able to see somebody manifest something into being that wasn't there was really, really special. And frankly, look, I mean, I had parents that supported it, they advocated for it, they were there behind me and saying like, hey, like try it, like go further with this thing. I mean, sometimes it was as silly and stupid as I started like a summer camp for ultimate frisbee, but instead of just, I was the person who was always coordinating it for everyone, but instead of doing that, I had to get sponsors and stuff because it was starting to cost a lot of money. So it wasn't even really a company. It was like it was a thing, an activity that people were doing, but it was starting to get expensive. And I was like, okay, so like we're gonna have to capitalize this somehow. And my mom was like, you should incorporate this. It's like you're charging people money, you're having expenses. It sounds like you're running a business. And I was like, oh, okay, all right. So went fill out the paperwork. So yeah, I guess it was a big part of the tailwind behind just getting certain muscle memory around it.
When people ask me what I do generally, and I don't have 8 minutes to describe it like I did to you earlier, my general answer is it's just a bunch of hustles all blending
Yeah.
together that I'm trying to make legal enough that I don't get in trouble. And that's, I think, the core of what I'm doing here is trying not to have a real job, but do work that makes me feel like it's not work anymore because I love doing it. There's always work to be done. There's always stress, and there's always things that are in this work that I do now that I don't like doing. Like I love talking to my guests. I don't so
Yeah.
much like listening to them talk back to me 10 times over afterwards as I'm editing through it, right? That can be long and tedious. But I also look at that as like that's the grind part that makes the rest of it so valuable to me. And you had said something about bringing something to ideation, and I I grew up very competitive, a
Mm.
lot of sports, a lot of like me versus you things, and I think that actually set me back in my own pursuit of entrepreneurship of any kind. It took me a while into my young adulthood to realize that what I really cared about wasn't winning so much. The winning didn't matter as much as I want to build a thing I'm proud of and put it out there for you to appreciate.
Oh, interesting. So it wasn't limiting from like a team building perspective. It was like clarity.
Maybe I think what was the winning part was the competitiveness of the winning did impact my ability to run a team because I don't want to say demanding is probably the wrong word. I was probably the kind of boss you go home and complain about and be
Mm.
like, this guy just doesn't understand. But it was because I was so excited about the thing and I was so motivated, I would just keep going until I dropped. And I expected that of everyone around me. And it was because I wanted to win that thing, whatever it was. But what I realized eventually was the more I'm helping uplift these people around me, the better of a job they're going to do for me and eventually give me more space to do more fun and interesting things.
Can I ask a question on that?
Yeah.
Do you specifically look for competitive people when you're going through a hiring process?
No, I don't. Not anymore. I can certainly appreciate it, and I certainly find value in people who've been part of teams, whether it's sports or otherwise, because there's a certain understanding of hierarchy and excellence that's expected generally, although everyone's experience is a little different. But I think a lot of times I look for people who are willing to, who have similar missions, similar values in their personal life, in their professional life. And because then I
Mm.
know that even if we disagree on how something should be done, we're both ultimately looking for the same goal of creating a world around us that has these certain values.
Yeah, and having a shared North Star always helps in tough times. Like it, what's the expression? Strong opinions held lightly, right?
And that was a long, took me a long time to learn those lessons. And I still struggle sometimes, but I think most of the recent history teammates that I've had or I've hired, I was mostly hiring based on fit and personality and just said I can teach them the skill sets they need,
Yeah,
or I can have some, I know the right people to teach them. And
yeah.
eventually, if I don't have to come into work, I know that my job is done here and I can start looking at the next thing.
I was just reading something that was talking about how a lot of the let's call it like just kind of middle of the fairway or more typical MBA business school books will talk a lot about management within the lens of a manager that isn't necessarily a founder, and that a lot of times people who found things start something and it starts to scale, starts to grow. A lot of times, regardless of if it's investors or existing team members or what have you, I mean, invariably you're going to be surrounded by more people if things are growing. Will get guidance to be like, yeah, you should step away, like almost make yourself redundant and pull back. And a lot of times they find themselves doing that and things are starting to kind of crumble. And I I thought it was really interesting, and it was not a long write up, so I feel like I want to dissect this further. But it was just talking about the fact that you don't see a lot of textbooks, white papers, or what have you around what it means to be a manager as a founder, and
Mm-hmm.
that it isn't uncommon or untoward towards anybody on your team to be having a direct relationship with somebody who's a more junior person, or having, it doesn't mean that you're micromanaging them, but actually like trying to build a relationship, articulate what you see as the business, as the vision, as what the purposes of the organization, or even just to bridge build, or to have a moment to hear that person. People might say, "Hey, that's a bad use of time. You don't have time for that. That's a meeting you shouldn't be doing." But that we're being a little too monolithic with how we understand what leadership looks like for different types of profiles. And I don't know, it's just interesting because it's questioning a lot of what we think to be the kind of table stakes. This is how you manage well. This is how it's like, yeah, but there's also a lot of professional managers at really big organizations that are just really good at playing that game to be in that management position.
I think at some point, if you are willing to, for me, at some point, I had to realize, like, hey, I have a way that I do things because this is the way that I do things.
Yeah,
And once I acknowledge that maybe my way works, but it isn't the best way, a good idea can come from anyone. And a lot of times, those ideas will come from the people that I'm tasking with doing the things that I'm not doing. So I'm not seeing the functionality like
right.
in that way. And so if that person feels empowered to come to me as their boss or their, you know, two steps up from them or wherever it might be in the
Yeah,
hierarchy, if they feel comfortable enough to say, "Hey, you know what? I'm doing this thing and I think it could be done better. Here's how." My theory was always became over time, well, let's encourage that and let's bring in all of those ideas. And it's, as the boss, it's my job to see the ones that make sense from a functionality standpoint or an efficiency standpoint or whatever, and put them into place. but they could have the idea and maybe they don't, and they can get the credit for it. I don't care because I'm going to win either way.
Yeah.
I'm up here, right? Like if you have a
No,
great idea and you get rewarded for it, it's good for me, it's good for the company, it's good for everybody. So we all win. And I
absolutely.
think taking my myself out of it as like a credit standpoint, probably in my, let's call it 30s, early 30s, it was like a huge advantage for me for the next part of my career, because I realized like this is a win-win-win game. Like if you win, I win, and the customer wins, we're all moving forward in a good way.
Yeah. I guess the more laps around the track I do, the more enamored I get with the topic of leadership and what good leadership looks like. And that's why I was curious for when you were saying you're competitive. I was wondering, not to make it overly prescriptive, but if you apply that in your process of deciding who's a good fit for any organization, I do always find that there's always a good balance of just being honest with who you are with your team. So when people join, I'm like, hey, I don't want to sugarcoat or obfuscate anything. Like I'll let you know. I was first generation American, born to immigrants. Like you should know that. Like that shaped who I am. Like captain of my sports teams, you should know that. That shaped who I am. Cut my teeth in investment banking with two architect parents. So we never talked around the dinner table around these topics. I did not know those things. And when I went into that field, I learned a lot of these kids have parents that work in this field, and they already kind of were on second or third base with like, oh yeah, I know how to do all these things. And it was like, okay, I, have a Sisyphusian level effort of pushing a rock up a hill, but I think I got this. And it's led me to where I'm at today. And so for whatever that's worth, I try to be very earnest and forthright with how I am. But I think you still need to breed a psychologically safe environment for people to be able to tell you things, whether it's, I need help, I made a mistake, I don't know, and actually create space for that so people can, or even if it's just a different idea, a different approach to something. Like, I think once it's not a psychologically safe environment, there's no chance that you're actually going to get a diversity of thought or contribution into a conversation.
They probably don't realize it at the time, but most of my favorite employees have always been the ones that challenged me the most or
Yeah.
disagreed with me the most. And
Yeah.
I don't think it's accidental that those are the ones that I see later in life who've gone off and done their own thing, because they probably
Right.
looked at me and said, well, I can do it better than that. And they're probably right. But at the end of the day, I was the one who was making the decisions that day.
Right.
I want to loop us back around to this machine. You started off with what you call the TK01. What does it do? Just because I want to make sure that everyone understands that it's a machine that makes coffee for people, bean to cup, but like there's a lot more going on there.
Right. It is. So yes, it is, the technical name for the category is super automatic bean to cup espresso machine. So it makes you have a little bit of marble mouth when you say that whole thing. But essentially what that means is the machine takes whole beans or pre-ground coffee, but most typically whole bean fits up to 12 ounces, 340-gram hopper, where it grinds, tamps, extracts the espresso. Also, super autos by name mean that they also automate all milk frothing functions. So you have the ability to change the dryness of how it's actually frothing the milk. It pulls via Venturi method, but ultimately, in its simplest form, what that means is you can brew an espresso, americano, cappuccino, latte at the touch of a button and from fresh whole beans.
Your machines, and you'll have, I don't quite have this history. Did the TK1 have an app as well, or was it
No,
the TK2 does?
no,
Okay.
yeah,
So who's the customer for this machine, and who do you see the audience being?
yeah. I mean, we have a lot of information, and that's the beauty of being a direct to consumer brand, or largely a direct to consumer brand, where we have that relationship with the end user to understand who this is resonating with. It is definitely a mixed bag, which I think is a great thing. We found that there is a bit of a quote unquote tribe that buys into the brand, which is always a good thing because it helps build evangelism. The whole what's the Brian Chesky quote of "I'd rather have 100 people love me than 1,000 people like me," and so we sell to what's interesting, I should say, is we have a lot of people assume that we just sell to coastal elites, and that's the only people buying these machines. Well designed, sits well and comfortably in a modern kitchen. It's not unreasonable to assume that. But the reality of it is, it's not nearly that monolithic. We sell across the entire country. We sell to a lot of, middle class homes. And the reality of it is, a lot of those customers are daily coffee consumers, not coffee consumers, but daily coffee consumers. And a lot of times are largely getting their coffee out of home, which we never started this company to be a substitute to cafes. But I will draw a distinction between experiential and utilitarian. And we try and really befriend and advocate for the experiential cafes, those who are really trying to advance, the experience and obviously the coffee for the consumers. But when we got a lot of phone calls like, this helped me and my wife kick our 2 Dunkin' a day habit or what have you, like, that wasn't the intention, but we realized we were solving a problem for those people as well.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. If you're going to be drinking a lot of coffee and you're able to do it at home from the push of a button, it's a lot easier
Right.
than driving to I
It's
mean, maybe
pre-pandemic.
pre-pandemic. Yeah, I suppose that would have been probably a benefit to have people all of a sudden stuck at home, forced to think about their everyday consumption.
It lifted up the whole category. I mean, I remember before the pandemic, I would just serve coffee. I mean, I didn't have any budget for marketing. I had 2 prototype machines. I just started knocking around on doors in the city because I heard Soho was supposed to be a cool area. So I would just knock on every door. And, you knock on 50 doors. Eventually somebody says yes to just serving coffee to the weekend crowd, which was great because it was actually a really nice cross section of America because you'd have a lot of people visiting New York, and it would probably be a 50-50 mixed bag between locals and visitors. And people couldn't name a brand of home espresso outside of Nespresso. Like, we talk like Breville is like ubiquitous and known. They couldn't name a single brand outside of Nespresso. I mean, they would mention Keurig, but if you tried to really push for an espresso home machine, the only name that they could name was Nespresso. And it was very interesting post pandemic to see how the market shifted. And I think the being at home, yes, but the time and the consideration period to actually research and be like, what else is out there that makes this easy? That was, to me, what I saw in the early days of when I started that company. It was that Venn diagram, or that kind of like overlap between the pod-based world where, okay, there's a convenience play here, which is what you're really pulling from. So that's important. Don't trivialize that, especially in the US. Convenience is really critical. And then the other side was just higher quality, bean the cup, and do as best as you can with whatever solution you're creating to make that as adaptable, as personalized for the consumer as possible, but ultimately as fresh and as good of quality, coffee as you can deliver. And that best of both worlds really happened to me intersect really nicely at these bean the cup machines. But I was looking at what was out there and I was like, this product assortment is abysmal. Like, this is not somebody's got to do something better. And I felt like I had the right background for it. I felt like that was the trifecta between opportunity, competency, and passion. I feel like anybody who starts anything needs, not in a binary sense, there is no perfection in any one three, but you need to at least some degree check all three of them. Like, I always joke, like, I'm the last guy who should do like a Web3 crypto startup. I don't know anything about it. You shouldn't ask me about it. Like, I'm not going to be helpful. But I really did love this category. And then I saw a really interesting opportunity.
You lost me at Web3. Crypto went right over my head. You are on the second generation of this machine. It's probably
Yeah.
a major reason why we connected, I think, is that was more recent. The TK2, which does come with, it was mentioning before, an app. Why introduce the app? Is there advantage and disadvantage to having more tech into a machine that,
Yeah.
A consumer is going to have on their shelf at home or in their law office or wherever it might be?
Yeah. I mean, I would say that there's a lot in the V2 that we just took, you know, all the insights from that direct relationship with end users on the V1, the TKO1, to feed into the development process of the V2. So it's not just the app component. There is the brew unit is entirely different. So we have a bigger basket. We have a stepper motor instead of a camshaft motor, which means that's how we get the level of controls that we need. So when it comes to being able to do things like drip coffee or having that kind of bloom cycle before you actually, there's no compression of the puck or anything like that. Why we have those levels of controls is because of, frankly, going full tabula rasa. So, a full redesign on the product, which was intense, and definitely was challenging to get out the door. But the connectivity specifically, what I will say there was, it's not just the app. It's actually, I would say the app is really, really great. And then there's so many things you can do on a mobile device that you're not going to be able to match the compute power on an appliance. But the fact that you have a device that can get OTA or over the air updates, meaning it can continue to improve over time, that's the thing that I love that we're seeing our community just start to realize the power of, because they're realizing, oh, we can give Terra Kaffe ideas and we can actually pitch them like, hey, can you build this? Can you build this? And we're actually delivering on that now. So we got the first machines, out the door in January. So it's been about 8-9 months. It does take time to collect enough data to determine what the priorities are for development, make the changes from a firmware software coding perspective, and then to test them. That's the most important thing. Because you push out to everybody's machine, you better be sure it works, because that's how you're going to get hit really hard with a problem if it doesn't. But people are finally now starting to experience that now that we've had 2 major OTAs with a third one coming soon. They're like, oh, this is really cool. So that's what I think you're just not going to get anywhere else is, yes, we have really, really, really good quality components in the V2. The TKO2's, just precision overall is not going to be like anything else out there just by the way it was designed. But the connectivity is the future proofing element. That's the whole planned obsolescence stuff that we're like, all right, this is nonsense. Let's make sure this thing gets better with age.
It's a different perspective as a company to look at it that way, as opposed to we want things to go obsolete so people purchase another, a second, a third, a fourth, a fifth one. Why take that path? I mean, it sounds like I appreciate it, but I also know that from when you're looking at numbers and you're talking to investors or funding, those things are going to come into that conversation at some point.
Yeah, it's just about aligning and having a shared vision of what the North Star is. If you want to become an indelible brand, if you truly want to be the best, yeah, you need to. I mean, the whole concept of going away from a pod in the first place, right, is it's not lost on anybody that the entire business model of an espresso or otherwise is really to lock you into their ecosystem so that they can make sure that you're continuing to buy the consumables from them. We already made the decision that we wanted to democratize that selection. We'll still try to offer you, hey, these are the coffees that, based off of our research and our relationships and our knowledge from customers, are going to function the best in the machine. They're going to taste the best for various profiles. We can always play a hand in supporting that experience to have a surprise and delight, to make sure that things are running seamlessly or smoothly. But we already kind of made that decision. And so the way I look at it is, if I'm in a category with effectively 5 brands who are competing for a not small market, if we become the brand of choice, I think there's plenty of economic gain to be had through that. And I think that instead of trying to lock people in, which we know becomes a not immaterial paper cut over time, I would rather focus more on making an amazing user experience. Dare I say, thinking a little bit more like Apple and being able to build an ecosystem play around that's a bit more harmonious with how people want to live. That was the overall strategy, and it has been for the business, which is, you're right, at times at odds with how investors think. But I think ultimately doing right by the customer is how you're going to build a successful business. So
As
I'm
I'm
right.
listening, I had 2 thoughts while I was listening to you. One was I would only get locked into another brand you mentioned that I'm not going to mention for liability reasons, jokingly, because as a middle-aged white guy, I would really like my future to be like George Clooney's. Second of all, when you walk through a thrift store, a Goodwill, a St. Bonaventure, let's say
Yeah.
Francis, and you go to the electronic shelf, you start seeing a lot of the same brand, especially in the coffee machine, over and over and over again.
Right.
And I would be lying if I didn't say that I would, it's not an everyday thing, but like if I do that, I notice that, oh, these machines are either people are unhappy with them or they're not lasting and they're moving
Right.
on. And my wife and I have tried to take into account, if we spend more now, do we save more in the long run? Because we're not, that's a different way of thinking about our personal economics, but it's not one that I think is, I would say, even the norm or taught well, especially to young people in the United States. That's why I advocate to add like a financial literacy class
Yeah.
as a requirement for all these kids. But I think those types of things, they come into play when you're talking, and I'm thinking about your especially your updates.
I think we are starting to see a shift back to that though. I think it got really bad over the last 2, 3 decades. And I feel like there is like even just what we're seeing in terms of apparel and kind of like the interest in vintage items and whatnot. Like I find more and more there are certain products that are trying to differentiate in terms of quality. And
Mm-hmm.
it is a gamble, you're right. It is challenging from an overall just economics, especially for startups. Oftentimes startups put the biggest burden on themselves over top of what you'll see massive corporations being willing to do. But I do think there is an emotional resonance that is tapping into something within the zeitgeist that isn't immaterial. It's still hard. It's hard to get the word out there. We found it challenging to get the word out there on what we're doing and trying to make sure that we're being smart, still judicious, because you have to be. You're still running a business at the end of the day. But the response has been so positive. And while we're still in the early innings, if this is what it looks like in the early innings, I think a lot of what we thought of thematically could have just, hit the nail on the head. And I don't want to speak prematurely, and I'm not a super superstitious guy, but like it's really encouraging to see people get behind something where they're like, this not only is this company building something really special, we make ourselves disgustingly available to people. Like I have way too many customers that have my personal cell number, but I'm like, I want to actually hear what you have to say on how to make this better. We're here for it. So
What about your world outside of coffee? You still playing ultimate frisbee? I mean, what does a day in the life of a founder of a company look like for you?
that is a very good question. Um, I will say that I am not great at balance right now, so I'm working a lot. Um, and I like the quote of everything in moderation, including moderation. So sometimes what the moment calls for is, you got to be just, 24/7 all in. And I kind of feel like I've been that way since I started the company. But I really don't think starting something like this should be a half measure. If you're going to do it, it should be a full measure. It's tricky, right? Because I want to say something that's more balanced. I want to advocate for something that I think is probably a healthier lifestyle. I think it's important. It's not lost on me. It is important. I just can't I don't know, share something that's not authentic and like, or just, I don't want to say anything that would be inaccurate. And the reality of it is I'm working every day. I do like to work out. So that's what recently something that I've just started picking back up because I think I let that go for far too long. And I think that mind body connection is critical. And if I'm going too long without taking care of my physical fitness and health, I think it really messes with my head. And so that's been the main thing. I haven't been compromising anymore. It's just, I'm going to make time to go to the gym every single day. I'm actually somebody who kind of enjoys it. So I don't really have to, beat myself up mentally to get myself to go to the gym. It's just about carving out time and frankly, not feeling guilt for not, there's always more to do. There's always more to do. The job doesn't end. And I think that's maybe the one thing I would say to founders is they're working through things or anybody just recognizing the fact that like you have to take care of yourself too. And while I haven't been the best at practicing what I preach there, I think I've kind of turned a corner on that.
I would point out, whoever's listening, you're not listening the day that we're talking, but it is Labor Day. And we should both be at the beach or in a park somewhere, but we're not.
Yeah, that's a good point.
I've been asking this of people for 4 years now because it's frankly one of the main reasons that I started the show, I think, was if you could offer some advice to somebody going on their own journey, something about being an entrepreneur or founding a company, and you've done a lot of that already. But if there was something that you could say, man, I wish I would have known this, what would that be?
I mean, I feel like the everything in moderation, including moderation, isn't a bad one, but I probably, I, I guess I'll point to something that I've found has helped provide me a bit of comfort, but that's as somebody who has a great deal of imposter syndrome as he's going through his journey. So take it as you will. If you don't have that, that's great. But I have found, especially with a lot of people in coffee, a shared sense of, especially because there's always this duality of the creative aspects of the field as well as with just running and operating something that is a tough business to operate. That I feel concerned with quoting this person because he's a bit of a problematic figure now. But the Charles Bukowski quote, that's something to the effect of, the problem with the world is that all the idiots are imbued with a sense of confidence while the intelligent ones are riddled with doubt. And it's like a lot of doubts and concerns. Like, I don't know, you're in good company. Like a lot of people that think a lot and ruminate and try and be reflective and be smart with decisions. Like a lot of us share the same headspace, and we're just trying to do our best work. And I think trusting your gut, as much as a platitude as it might sound, is I think really critical, and not being too hard on yourself.
I know the TK2 is out now, and we're going to share links and all the fun marketing stuff about that on our show and in our newsletter. But what does the future of the company look like for you?
I mean, we just got the TKO2 out the door. So for us, it's just, we're really excited to get it into more people's hands and have more people try it out. It's going to be showing up in a lot more places soon. So, we're just scratching the surface at the moment. And like I said, we're constantly asking people for feedback on that experience with it and letting us know, constantly how we can improve upon it. Because again, that's a big, part of the product's unique aspects and qualities, is that it will continue to improve over time. And then aside from that, we just want to build the strongest brand when it comes to coffee hardware and coffee products. So you can imagine we're taking all that feedback and we're always thinking about kind of what's next. But given how much runway is left on the O2, it's kind of, the main focus at the moment. So yeah, that's what we're looking at.
I'm going to put you on the spot. Better coffee, Brooklyn or Manhattan?
Wow. Yeah, Brooklyn all day.
And when you are heading down the street and you've already had your coffee in the Terra Kaffe at home, but you need another one, and you see that cool looking spot, I'm guessing Park Slope or Bushwick somewhere now. It's hard for me to remember. I don't know what the neighborhoods look like anymore. What
Not
are you
far
gonna
off.
What are you gonna order when you walk into that coffee shop and look at the menu?
If it's a good cafe, I mean, they'll usually have a few options on, just if I wanted to pull a straight double. I mean, I think there's nothing wrong with that. I kind of feel like it's the golden cup. But yeah, if it's morning time, I'll do a cappuccino.
I just actually thought of this. I'm gonna throw this in real quick, but you mentioned tea influence growing up,
Yeah.
and I'm wondering if there's a future in which you have a tea machine coming out, or if that's been demanded at family gatherings.
Yeah, we got to drop the cafe and just become Terra.
At some point.
Yeah.
Sahand, I really appreciate you spending time with me on the show. Did I miss anything today?
No, I think we covered it.
I think we covered it and maybe a little bit of extra for everyone, so that's probably good too. Thank you so much for being here and sharing some of the story. I think people who listen to this show are often in the throes of thinking about doing something of their own, and so hearing what other founders have done or what things stopped them or motivated them to keep going is really valuable. So thank you.
Of course. Thanks for having me, Ryan.
Okay, some key takeaways from today's podcast. Sahand has a multicultural background, and he grew up as a first-generation American. living that Jersey lifestyle, albeit less Jersey Shore and more learning languages, and taking on entrepreneurship challenges with the support of his parents. His mom, in particular, stoked his entrepreneurial bent. Besides role modeling such behavior by starting an architectural firm, she encouraged him to see things through, to take the tinkering one step further, one step further, one step further. You get the point. As an adult, Sahand and myself reflect with appreciation for some of the things that 8, 10, 12-year-old versions of ourselves might have rebelled against or seen as challenges. It's funny how that works. He didn't start down the Terra Kaffe path until after having experienced startup life as an employee. To some extent, Sahand knew what he was getting into. When he was going through the process of finding a coffee machine for his countertop, he realized there was a gap in the market, that he had the unique combination of skill set, motivation, and capability to fill. Today, his company, Terra Kaffe, produces bean-to-cup coffee experiences through the wide-ranging capability of their super automatic and connected TK2 machine. Our conversation today evolved beyond the why and how did I build this stage. Being an entrepreneur is hard. It's also rewarding. It can be a challenge to find the same level of satisfaction working for someone else as you do when you're trying to build something of your own. But it is possible with the right leadership. Leadership skills training isn't high on the list when someone is in overdrive, trying to create their vision, their thing, their widget, their company. So I ask you to remember, consider how you build a team. Do you look for character traits or skill sets, or something else entirely? As a leader, do you demand a certain type of fealty, or expect the same motive from your staff or colleagues as you have yourself? How do you ensure that your team cares about the same things as much as you do? According to Sahand, it helps to have a shared North Star and strong opinions held lightly. The TK2 does a lot of things, and its connected nature allows for over-the-air upgrades and gives Terra Kaffe the ability to directly respond to the needs of their customers who've invested in machines, which retail at about $1,595. The TK2 machine was never meant to be a substitute for a great coffee shop experience, rather more of a replacement for the utility of coffee brewed for you on a daily basis. Combining the convenience of being at home with quality was the goal. Finally, being a founder often means giving up balance. Work-life balance is important, but not always feasible. All I can say is try to be aware of where you're stretching yourself thin, and know that at some point, you'll need reinforcements there. You're not alone if you're feeling doubt. Great companies have long been founded on the idea that if we just push through that doubt, we might achieve greatness. Finally, Brooklyn coffee, better than Manhattan coffee. Don't at me, at Sahand. Speaking of, thanks to Sahand Dilmaghani for coming on the Coffee People podcast and for caring about creating a product that isn't immediately obsolete when upgrades become available. It's a personal pet peeve of mine how many products are designed to be paperweights. Head to terrakaffe.com for details or to order yourself one of their machines. And follow the TK story on the Terra Kaffe YouTube channel, where they share how-tos on the machines, tips and tricks, and all sorts of fun stuff. You can find those links, more key takeaways, and some other relevant and probably irrelevant content from today's podcast. Even see what we're listening to with our cup of coffee in this week's edition of the newsletter online at coffeepeoplepodcast.com. You'll also see the tickets for TrailFest. TrailFest is a weekend-long campout and bike event that serves as a fundraiser for the San Diego Mountain Biking Association. It's held every October. It's 3 days of bike demos, campfires, happy hours, stargazing, and of course, great coffee, this year served up by yours truly. You'll find tickets at that link. Thank you for listening, and if you're doing so on Apple or Spotify, please tap the follow button and give us as many stars as you feel we've earned today. Or if you too are an analog human being, tell a friend about the show. It really helps. I'm always telling my coffee friends about Roastar coffee packaging, found at roastar.com. They're our presenting sponsor, and they help tell the big story of your small business, or even your home-roasted coffee. They enable you to share a product that turned out just perfect with your family, friends, and coffee community. And since they offer low minimums, quick turnarounds, and even have a design lab on roastar.com, they're going to help you make a great-looking package. They work with you to ensure that in a sea of competition, your package is going to stand out. So check out roastery.com. We're also supported by some great industry partners. Our legacy partners include Zumbar Coffee and Tea, Steady State Roasting, Coffee Cycle Roasting, Maria Coffee, and Cape Horn Green Coffee Importers. A special thank you to Alden Hazuri at Crossings Coffee and the Hales Brothers at Hasea Coffee Source, who've been supporting our Coffee Smarter efforts. Our full city partners include Ignite Coffee Company, Ascend Coffee Roasters, Camp Coffee Company, Civets Roasting Machines, Me and My Uncle Coffee, Craft 42 Roasters, and Cozy Canine Coffee. Look for pop-in episodes featuring Jason from Camp Coffee, Carolyn from Cozy Canine, and Aaron and Taylor from Craft 42 in the next couple of weeks. Season 12 is on the horizon. We've got a lot going on. More and more inspiration and motivation and great coffee are on the way. I want to thank you for listening to this podcast for 11 seasons. That's insane. Thank you for sharing it, for asking questions, and of course for being coffee curious. This show, the Coffee People Podcast, is part of the Roast West Coast Coffee Network. And this episode has been written, produced, researched, and recorded by me, Ryan Woldt. One last time, I hope this episode has found you happy, healthy, and with at least a thread of sanity left, enabling you to make it through the day. Always tip your baristas and be sure to drink good coffee. Hey everyone, you know what would be super cool? If you guys got some cool stuff, some new merch, some new gear, and you also supported the Roast West Coast Coffee Network in the process. We don't do a lot of affiliate marketing, but check out the links to Baratza, Simply Good Coffee Brewers, and Hydro Flask in this podcast show notes or on our website at roastwestcoast.com or coffeepeoplepodcast.com. If you click those links to those brands and you end up buying something, it actually really helps us out. They give us a little bit of a financial kickback. And as you know, we only partner with brands that we actually use and believe in. I'm saying we, but I just mean me. I've used my Simply Good Brewer maybe 700-800 times over the last 2 years. I use my Baratza grinder every day. My Hydro Flask is with me at all times. It's right here in the booth with me, and it is frankly beat to crap, and I probably should get a new one. But the beauty of these things is they keep on functioning. They're all products that have kept working time over time over time, which is something I appreciate, and I'm certainly willing to support. I hate planned obsolescence, and these products don't do that. So, support Roast West Coast and the creation of the Coffee People and Coffee Smarter podcasts, and get yourself something cool in the process. We appreciate you. If you are in the early stages of your coffee journey, we want to support you. Check out the Coffee Smarter Education podcasts. Coffee Smarter is designed to enable coffee drinkers to brew a better cup of coffee at home. And Coffee Smarter Pro covers industry-specific topics for baristas, roasters, shop owners, and aspiring coffee professionals. You'll find both shows on your favorite podcast platforms or on our website at coffeesmarterpodcast.com.